attention, because The View is live.
It's hot.
They're hitting the table with an entire show of hot topics. Terror in New York. The city rocked by its worst attack since 9/11. Has the White House already politicized this tragedy? Plus, it's the hot topic causing scandal and outrage from Hollywood to Capitol Hill.
I have a Me Too story to share.
Congresswoman Jackie Speier is live for her first national interview about how she says she was sexually assaulted by a former congressional chief of staff. Wendy's Halloween scare. What's she saying about the shocking moment when she fainted on live TV? The View starts now with Whoopi, Sarah Haynes, Joy Behar, Sunny Hostin, and Meghan McCain. Now, let's get things started.
First of all of us here are sending our love to everyone impacted by this insane terrorist attack. Really, the first one we've really endured since September 11th. 8 people lost their lives after a man from Uzbekistan, who's been in the U.S. since 2010, used a rented truck to plow into people on a New York bike path in an ISIS-inspired attack. I mean, they weren't sure what it was. Initially, they said it was a road rage thing, but which wasn't ringing true for a lot of folks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think what a lot of people did on September 11th. I started trying to find my family, you know, that live in that area or work near that area. And it's that terrifying feeling that you get that, oh my goodness, this is happening again.
Well, we talked about on the show when the things your mom will do to find you.
Oh, yeah.
I had been in a place with a bad signal and was totally checked out. I walk out and I see my mom's called me twice, and the text on the voicemail was like, your dad and I haven't heard from you. And I'm thinking, Mom, like, it's been 24 hours. And then I saw, and then it panicked me. I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is my neighborhood, and one of my best friends was in the grocery store across the street when it happened and heard everything and came out and was panicking. She's 9 months pregnant, hysterical afterwards, so I called her. And the thing about this is that the trend of taking cars and jamming it into mass groups of people and crowds is the new trend with ISIS. We see it in Europe. We see it happening in the United States of America. We were talking a lot in the commercial break, and one of the things that, Joy, you and I are in agreement with is the social media's responsibility in this, meaning that this guy had a track record on social media. Now, I don't know about you, but when I look at shoes on Zappos, somehow magically a little ad appears on my Instagram and appears on my computer. So if you can track what shoes I'm looking at to buy, why can't you track the trends of people who want to hurt Americans?
I think they do. I think they do, though. I mean, the NYPD has been incredible. Like I said, we haven't had this since many years ago now. So they are doing
Maybe
an incredible...
they are doing
I don't know if you can stop this type of thing. And what I was reading is that, you know, Trump wants to put in extreme vetting. He's upset about extreme... He wants to make it even harder to get into the country. But my feeling is any tourist could come over here. You could come from Spain, Italy, France, all the countries we still love, Germany, and get a driver's license, get a zip car or something, or a van, and plow into anybody. So how does the extreme vetting help, really?
Well, it doesn't. And it also doesn't help because this guy was from Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is not on the list of countries that he wants to ban. And what was sort of hypocritical to me is, you know, when the terror attack happened in Las Vegas, everyone was saying it's too soon to talk about gun control. It's too soon to talk about this. Yet, this very same day, we hear from the administration, extreme vetting. This is terror. We need, you know, why don't we, this selective outrage that we're hearing from this administration is really concerning.
Well, I just want to point something out. You know, slightly more than 1 million people have entered the U.S. under this program, based on the analysis of the State Department records. At least
24,000 people.
Thank you. Have entered the country from Uzbekistan since 2005, according to records. And the program, which has its origins in the 1986 Special Preference Program, requires applicants to have no criminal record and to come from a country not on the list.
But the point you're making is that they're radicalized here, which when we're
part of the point I'm making is that you can't. There are sometimes where you can't stop stuff because you don't know when it's happening. So, you know, he sort of threw Chuck Schumer under the bridge and said, you know, this is your fault. But the bottom line is, look, you can vet people as much as you want to. And if they make a shift in the middle, there's nothing you can do about it. Now, there are things we can do. So now that we've seen all of this in Europe, I would like to make some suggestions. You know, when you have a bike path, and you need, you know, utility vehicles to get up and down there, they should have to swipe in order to move something that will allow a truck to get through. And then once they get the truck through, these come back so that the bikes can get through, so you can't drive a truck up.
Yeah, when you have those barricades in front of churches and things that
Yeah, they have those in front of Time Warner Building.
They have them in Times Square now.
Sunny, real quickly, just to point out, I do think it's interesting that after the shooting in Las Vegas and we spoke about gun control, people were like, oh, you're politicizing it. And then jumping to Schumer within hours of this happening. But the distinction that I can get on board with is terrorism is specifically defined by the motivation being ideological, religious. So the fact that he came out screaming that, and also leaving notes pledging allegiance to ISIS. To me, it's not too soon to call it terrorism.
No,
because it definitely is clearly stated that. Whereas we can't find the motivation still for the Vegas shooter.
Go ahead.
Well, it's just important that this isn't an American thing, this sort of anti-immigration rhetoric. Look at Brexit. Look what's happening in Germany after they let 1 million immigrants in. Angela Merkel probably won't get reelected. Every global leader that came in with Obama in this sort of progressive, open borders policy have not only been voted out, but they just don't exist globally anymore. So I think when we're talking about rhetoric, this isn't just uniquely to America. This is happening all over the world.
No, it is happening all over. But unfortunately, we are in a situation where the conversation starts with you people. Do you know what I mean? It's the otherism. And the reason I pointed this out is because thousands of people come into this country every day from other countries, and they respect us, they take care of us, they look out for us, we look out for them. And there are those folks, and whether they're homegrown terrorists, you know, we don't know what the man was yelling in Vegas. When he was, we have no idea what he was doing. But that's terrorism as well, because it's not just the ideology that we don't know much about, but it's also the ideology that says, you know, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have the right to exist.
Or I'm going to domestically terrorize.
Well, the terror part, I get the inciting
He's a domestic terrorist.
But the motivation is usually what
the business of not talking about the guns after that was a ploy for the Second Amendment people, I think, to say, let's put it on a back shelf and that people will forget about it. Meantime, remember what happened that day. He had one of these assault rifles, and he added something to make it even worse.
The lock stock.
What do they call that thing?
The lock stock, isn't it?
Well,
yes.
I don't speak gun.
Okay, whatever it is. And so they said, oh, we're going to do something about that and make that illegal. They haven't.
It went away.
It's gone.
But he
you see, that's an interesting way to deal with this. Put it on the back burner. We don't have to talk about it.
But he bucks the trend of, there are other things at play. When you're screaming Allah Akbar, to say that there's not some of radicalized ideology playing at hands, and I think what makes conservatives crazy is when you're like, oh, we can't talk about people being radicalized, about radical Muslims existing. And at the same time, by the way, this shooter in Las Vegas, it's horrific. It should certainly be called terrorism. I called it terrorism immediately. But this gentleman, why he is so insane is because he was wealthy, he was white, he had no criminal background whatsoever. So there's not a trend with that.
Shooters are white men.
Yeah,
but they're not normally wealthy men that make over, I believe, $1 million.
Also, we don't know his motivations.
We don't know his political motivation.
But you know, but what the difference is when you say yes, and he was screaming this, you immediately put in your mindset all the stuff that you've heard. When you have a white male terrorist, people don't, you don't have the same response as you have when you say he was yelling, honor to Allah, or whatever he was yelling.
That is the profile of a white male shooter. And so what are we going to do now? Should all white males be extracted from the country?
No.
Should they be extremely vetted? I mean, that thinking doesn't make sense.
There are white men that are radicalized.
Yes.
You know, we have people flying from Minnesota to go
I think we should focus on what happened yesterday. I mean, and not that the Las Vegas shooting wasn't a complete and utter tragedy, but when we're talking about open borders, when we're talking about immigration, the red meat of what I believe got President Trump elected president was saying this. I was against the travel ban. First of all, it doesn't include Saudi Arabia. The 11 hijackers on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia, number one. But I will say that people respond right now when they're so scared, and I get scared. It's happened in my neighborhood. People respond to red meat rhetoric, so that it doesn't even matter what we're saying right here. People are responding to fear mongering, and we have to learn how to speak in a language and translate that. Like, again, what I just said, the travel ban actually doesn't do anything. This guy was radicalized here. The San Bernardino shooter, Chicago, Pulse nightclub shooter, Long Island. These are Americans.
But the bottom line is, you know, when you talk about radical terrorists, you are describing a specific group of people. When we talk about terrorism, we don't talk about, you know, they don't like to talk about domestic terrorism because it opens a door to a question that they can't answer, which is how do we deal with these angry white men who are wanting to shoot people up, who think all women should be doing this, who think all brown people should be over here. How do we deal with that? Because they're just as... The Harvey Weinstein scandal has been a rallying cry to join the war against sexual harassment, and it's expanded from Hollywood to Capitol Hill. Congresswoman Jackie Speier came forward with her own story of sexual assault, and it went viral. Take a look.
I was working as a congressional staffer. The chief of staff held my face, kissed me, and stuck his tongue in my mouth. So I know what it's like to keep these things hidden deep down inside. Many of us in Congress know what it's like, because Congress has been a breeding ground for a hostile work environment for far too long.
Wow. Now she joins us live from Washington, D.C. Hello, Congresswoman.
Good morning.
Congresswoman Speier, it's Joy Behar speaking. But before we get into that topic, we were just talking about yesterday's terror attack. The administration is saying they want to step up extreme vetting. And I made the point that might help a little bit, but there are tourists coming over here. Anybody could actually do what this guy did yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before? Yesterday. So what do you think about all that? What do you say to all that?
Well, Joy, you're right. Actually, we have a situation in this country now where lone wolves are everywhere, and we have extraordinary law enforcement and intelligence officers who are surveilling them. But it takes an inordinate amount of labor and time and effort, and sometimes we catch them and sometimes we don't. But extreme vetting is not going to solve this particular tragedy, because clearly he had been here for 7 years and had become part of the community.
Right. And anybody can just come over here. But let's get on to the other subject, and the reason that you're here, because you were assaulted over 40 years ago. Why did you feel you had to keep it a secret until now?
Well, you know, back then in the 70s, sexual harassment wasn't even a term that was used, and it wasn't coined until later that decade, and then in the 80s when it was found that under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act it was a violation, that it was a form of sex discrimination. So back then it wasn't as keenly defined. And so I took it like most women at the time took it. You just stayed away. You made sure that you weren't in that kind of a situation again. And as it turned out, I didn't have any other incidents with this particular individual. But now times are changed, and I think that we have a means by which we can hold people accountable. Unfortunately, Congress is not doing it.
Congresswoman, this is Sarah Haynes. I wanted to ask you, senators like Claire McCaskill and Heidi Heitkamp have come out with some stories, with their own stories of harassment, also Kellyanne Conway. Since you released your video on Friday, have you heard from other women that have experienced similar things?
I have. Now, for most of us as elected members of Congress, we're in positions of power. We need to focus on those who are vulnerable, the staffers who are afraid to come forward for fear they'll lose their jobs. And we have heard from a number of victims who haven't come forward publicly for fear that they will lose their jobs.
And what is the culture like for women working on Capitol Hill? Because we all see that the representation isn't necessarily equal to the population. So you're outnumbered. What is it like there?
So it's an institution, 80% of which is male, and you have a position held by these men who are in power, and because the system protects them. I mean, if you have been violated, you go to what's called the Office of Compliance, and you have to go through what's called legal counseling for a month, and then you have to go through mediation, and then you have to wait another month before you can even file a claim, and you are required to file a non-disclosure agreement when you start mediation. So the perpetrator is never outed, and in fact, any kind of settlement is paid for by all of us as taxpayers out of the U.S. Treasury.
Oh, my gosh.
Congresswoman, this is Sunny Hostin. Your story of the process is just ridiculous, but you're working on new legislation to change the system. We hear, what will that entail?
So it is shockingly biased in favor of the institution and the perpetrator. So besides requiring mandatory training on sexual harassment for both the members and the staff, we're going to change the process. So we're going to shorten the length of time that you can file a claim. You will be able to then not be required to file a non-disclosure agreement. We're going to make sure that some of the most vulnerable, the interns and fellows who work in Congress, have nowhere to go right now, and they will be protected under this new law that we will be introducing.
Hello. Hello, Congresswoman. This is Meghan McCain. So I just want to switch gears here. We've been talking a lot about Mueller's Russia investigation since it began. You are a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Can you tell us what we can expect, and who do you think should be nervous at this moment?
Well, I think Michael Flynn will certainly be someone who will come under the crossfires of the Mueller investigation. I would suspect that he will be indicted as well. I think that the Mueller investigation is doing an extraordinary job of being non-political, looking at the law and basing their decisions on the law. I think the investigations going on by both the House and the Senate are much more complex because they're political institutions, and certainly in the House there is a difference of opinion as to what we should be looking at. But for all of us as Americans, we do not want an adversarial force to come into our country and impact our elections, and that's exactly what the Russians did.
And what do you think about Trump dismissing Papadopoulos as an errand boy? What do you think about that?
Well, you know, he's very good at somehow suggesting that everyone's a volunteer. And the truth is, in the campaign, a lot of people were volunteers. Even the chairman was a volunteer. A lot of people didn't get paid that were supposed to get paid. But he was right there. He was right there interacting with the top members of the Trump campaign hierarchy. He was sitting at a meeting with the National Security Advisory Committee. The president, when he was a candidate and was asked by the editorial board of the Washington Post as to who his national security advisors were, he mentioned George Papadopoulos, and you know, he doesn't have the ability to remember a lot of names, so I thought that was significant in and of itself.
And that's a hard one to pronounce.
Congresswoman, the next time you're in New York, come and sit with us at the table. And just not for nothing, when you talk to these interns that you were talking about, tell them they have to stick together and they have to have each other's backs. And if they have that, they'll be protected until you can get stuff in order, because nobody should be nervous about talking. They can talk to their friends. If they got each other, then that's step one. Thank you for coming, Jackie Spear. Come back again. We'll be right back.
She's great.
I know.
Hey, you know, before we start talking about anything else, we want to say, hey, Wendy Williams, feel better.
Yeah.
Feel better.
Oh, yeah.
That was crazy. Aren't you going on her show?
I'm doing Wendy this Friday. I'll report that I'm going to be plugging my book, The Great Gas Bag, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Right.
We're trying to get it on the bestseller
Yeah,
list.
but it was it.
But Wendy, I'll see her on Friday, so I will report back to you, see how she is. She fainted in the costume.
Yeah. And that's, you know, it's a tough thing because people were saying, well, her face, she looks,
look at her,
because it's like she knows something's wrong.
Yeah.
She can't figure out what it is.
Yeah.
And she can't articulate it because you're trying not to pass out, which is what ended up happening. So we know you were scared, but we got you. We're glad you're feeling better. We know you were on today. So now to something totally different. When General John Kelly became White House Chief of Staff, people claimed he would be the sane voice of reason that was so desperately needed. So much maybe for that. Take a look.
I would tell you that Robert E. Lee was an honorable man. He was a man that gave up his country to fight for his state, which in 150 years ago was more important than country. It was always loyalty to state first back in those days. Now it's different today. But the lack of an ability to compromise led to the Civil War.
So what they couldn't compromise on was exactly what?
Well, it's really hard to compromise on the abusing and the maiming and the raping and the dehumanizing of human beings, the slaves. So that's pretty difficult. And I think, you know, what concerned me so much about his comments were that I was more comfortable with having Trump at the wheel, knowing that Kelly was right next to him and could pull the wheel away. Yeah. But now that we have a general who is supposed to know history, who is supposed to, you know, have studied strategically our history, for that sort of, I don't even know how to describe it, ignorance.
But does he think Frederick Douglass is alive also?
I mean, that was shocking.
I mean, how bad is he exactly at this?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I firmly disagree with the statement. And Ken Burns, who is the documentarian that he quoted a few times in that, he tweeted, many factors contributed to the Civil War. One caused it. Slavery. So I firmly disagree with what he said in this interview, but for me that doesn't make me sign off on everything, because for example, my dad is a very measured man and we disagree on a lot of politics. But just because I don't agree with him doesn't mean I wouldn't hand over the controls of a situation to be calm and reasonable. I know I'm using a very personal example, but I don't have to agree with you on everything to still trust you in your area of expertise.
But this should be his area of expertise, and he was ignorant in his area of expertise.
Well,
that's what concerns me.
I think but there was a,
Can I tell you what we're not doing? We're not talking about Russia. I think this is entirely political. I think this is a great way to switch the narrative. I also think with Steve Bannon gone, somebody in the White House has to throw the red meat to the base. There are all these conversations that we've had on this show as well, talking about the monuments, talking about the Civil War. To me, this is all political. I think it's a total distraction.
Does he not believe those things? Does he not believe those things, though? Are you saying he doesn't believe
I'm telling you how politics works, and I'm telling you the Trump administration is brilliant at throwing a shiny object to the left to get us talking about something else.
This is not just to the left. This is to the nation. It's not, we're not just left and right. This is about history. And if you're going to change the narrative about history, then know your history as a Republican. The Republican Party, as you may or may not know, was anti-slavery.
Lincoln.
You know?
Yes.
Well, that was a different party.
But the point is that when you're talking about, you know, someone like
Robert E. Lee.
Robert E. Lee, who didn't want Confederate monuments, just FYI.
Yeah.
He said he thought it was wiser not to open the sores of war. Because he understood that he was on the wrong side of this at the time. So to start the conversation with, you know, he probably was a very nice man. I don't know.
Well,
but he wanted to... Hold on.
Go ahead.
About that.
Hurry up.
Did you just roll your eyes at me again?
No, not at you.
Oh, okay.
I looked down.
Okay.
I looked down.
But you did one of these. Let me show you what you did.
I did.
That's for Robert E. Lee.
That's her Robert E. Lee.
Yes.
But the bottom line really is, when you decide to secede from your country because you want to keep your slaves, that's a bit of an issue. Yeah. And the fact that he said we shouldn't reopen this because I know how bad this was. I know. I kind of got to go, listen, I get you. I hear you. Yeah. But he needs to know that you can't equate who is in today with who you're going to remove monuments for tomorrow. And I say this only for one reason. There are no monuments to Hitler and the SS in Germany, because that was a period of time in their country where they said, we don't want to reopen it. So that's, and yeah, maybe we are not talking about Russia, and maybe okay, because y'all know what's happening with Russia.
Can I make a point?
Everybody's getting nervous.
I want to just read one more thing about Robert E. Lee, because it's interesting, because he's a mixed bag, this guy. But the rationalization that slave owners had in those days was interesting. He was a slave owner. And this is a quote. In an 1856 letter, he wrote, "The blacks are immeasurably better off here than in Africa, morally, socially, and physically. The painful discipline they are undergoing is necessary for their instruction as a race, and I hope will prepare and lead them to better things." Talk about a rationalization for enslaving human beings. They're better off here than in Africa.
Can I add this? I mean,
It's fascinating how the mind can make up such lies.
And there are several books that people can read about Robert E. Lee, but what I want to add is not only did he discipline his slaves, he was known as torturing his slaves, and after he would whip them, he told people that they should be put in brine, that their scars should be brined. And so we're talking about someone that is the least honorable man.
But he was a good loser. Don't forget that.
Well, but here's the thing: when we're talking, treason is the thing here. That's the thing that makes this, for me, kind of an odd conversation. But you know, everybody had slaves. Lincoln had slaves. Everybody had slaves. It was the end thing to do. Lincoln had slaves. Everybody had slaves.
I mean,
but here's the deal. Somehow, Abe decided that it was better for the country, to move forward and release this out, get rid of the slavery. And when people said, no, we'd rather keep our slaves than keep our country, that is an issue.
Yeah.
That's an issue. And so that's why I brought him up, and that's why we go in and come right back.
It's all pop culture.
So, welcome back. So apparently the new guy demonized political correctness in his tweet about the terror attack. But a new poll found that 71% of Americans say that being PC has silenced discussions we need to be having. So I'm going to ask, what do you think is? Give me an example of what is what political correctness is to you.
Oh,
I mean, I am a conservative on television. Some people recognize me someplace. I go to restaurants, this show, different places on the subway, and people who don't want to talk about being a Republican in Manhattan and major cities will come up to me and say that they're uncomfortable talking about it, but they want me to know that they agree with me, but they want to do it privately. So when we talk about political correctness, I think sometimes being a conservative, when in places where it's not socially acceptable to, people want to confide in me. That's when I heard this was my interpretation, but 71% is a lot. It's a major majority of people.
Yeah, but I mean, I think they did misconstrue it a little bit, because if you do a Polish joke, which was popular at some point, and how dumb Polish people were, that was a joke. Remember that? I don't know if you remember this. It was going around, Polish jokes. Well, if you're Polish, you don't think that's too funny. So then it's politically correct to those Polish people that you're making this joke about.
But sometimes when you're speaking about your own things, like let's say I'm not a comic, but I reference sometimes battling my weight or yo-yoing things, and I make a self-deprecating joke about my size.
Right.
People are like, it's not very politically correct to talk about your, and like it's not about you, it's about me. And the fact that they sometimes squash conversation when you're coming out as a comic, we deal with it. Halloween costumes, yesterday was Halloween. People are like, oh, they just like wait for it. Used to be a time where you could be clever and just be creative and go out for Halloween.
Everybody's looking to pounce.
And the next day there's always story after story about what wasn't very tasteful.
And ground zero are college campuses. Like you said, many comedians, Jerry Seinfeld being one of them, Bill Maher, say they will not perform on college campuses anymore because everyone's so offended. There's so many safe spaces. People like Ann Coulter, I don't agree with her on almost everything, but she doesn't feel comfortable, or she has to have security when she goes and makes speeches on college campuses. I think it's the level of intolerance of not hearing things that you're not comfortable with. And it seems to be an epidemic.
That's a valid point, because
Go ahead.
I think, no matter how uncomfortable we are with opposing views or the most strident views, I think it's a really small price to pay for freedom of speech, which is the pillar of our democracy. So I'm never really that uncomfortable with. Yeah, I'm never, and I said it on this show a lot. I'm never really that uncomfortable with people that are non-PC because they have a right to say it. You've got to protect the most unpopular speech.
One little
because it's
point.
usually the minority
One little
view.
point. It's a similar point to the conversations we have about harassment and everything else. What is your intent? What is your intent? Is your intent to hurt me? Is your intent to humiliate me? As a comedian, I probably say things that people can construe as incorrect, but it's all done in fun, and there is no malicious intent.
Yeah. But if you're the person that the malicious intent is not about, and it's always been the case, and you've always been the butt of the joke, and you say, whether you're a woman or a black person or a Asian person or a blonde, if you've just had it and you don't want to hear it anymore, I think it is your right to demand better material from people. You know, don't just go to this. Don't just go to the okie-doke joke. Figure something else out. And I think a lot of people want to be able to say what they've always said, but, you know, you can do it, but you might get a different response than you would have gotten before. And we all have to come to the balance and go above it and and start doing different stuff. We'll be right back.
In daytime, dishing out the hottest topics.
Give me some credit. I'm a tough chick.
This is why you need women running the world.
People want change.
You're right. You're right.
Oh, boy.
That went too far, I guess.
So grab your phone and join the conversation.
I'd love to see that.
And don't miss The View on ABC.
So, in order to be totally accurate, Mary Todd Lincoln had slaves. Her family had slaves. And when she married Abe, some of her people went with him. He technically did not have slaves, but he also was not an abolitionist. And if you want to know more about Lincoln and how he thought and why he thought the way he did, look it up.
Yeah.
Okay? All right.
Also,
everybody good?
Angela Merkel won her re-election.
Yes,
I
she did.
misspoke. I apologize.
Anyone else?
Well, apparently wedding season is wrapping up around the country. And a newly wedded bride wrote a blog on Refinery 29 about how she was hit with a severe case of post-wedding blues when it was all over. What does this mean, post-wedding blues? I don't understand.
Well, there's a letdown because you're the center of attention. You're wearing a beautiful dress. Everybody loves you. You're doing the electric dance or whatever that thing is. And then you cap it off supposedly with great sex. And then the next day it's back to normal.
I didn't experience it that way, but I did.
You know, I'm so old. Guys, I remember times when people had sex on their wedding night.
We ate cake in bed.
Well, that's what a lot of people do.
No.
I don't know if you experienced this, Sarah, but for me...
The look on your face right now is everything.
Well, because when I think of post-marital issues, I think, oh, she woke up and went, or he woke up and went, oh.
That was you?
No, right?
To me, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about something.
I thought that's what they were talking about too.
But there has to be some correlation between the most over-the-top weddings that I've been to, ones that are so expensive to fly to and go to, and then they're like, I've had this experience, a good friend, super huge, very expensive wedding to go to, got divorced like 6 months later, and I was like, I spent a lot of money celebrating you, and then all of a sudden...
Can I get the blending back?
You wake up thinking, oh my God, I just did this.
Yes.
Wait a second. What do you want, a warranty on every time you go to a wedding?
Yes. You should get at least a 1-year guarantee.
Tomorrow, Chris Matthews is playing hardball in Hot Topics about President Trump and Hillary Clinton's so-called ties to Russia. Plus, the amazing Andy Serkis on being the master of motion capture acting and why people are gasping at his latest movie, Breathe.
Welcome back. The blockbuster Pixar sequel Cars 3 is available on digital download right now, and thanks to our parent company Disney, members of our audience are getting a digital download. There we are.
The show is over.
The show is over.
So, except your puppy named Bernie Sanders is backstage.
That puppy is really cute. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming. Have a great day, everybody.
Not everyone
Take a little time.